Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us at FinCon session, Putting the We in Wealth, Adapting to a Shifting Investor Demographic. At the time when fintech innovation is making investing experiences easier, more accessible, a growing diverse set of financial advisors are adapting to meet the needs of investors and human beings in the backdrop of a changing demographic population. I'm Lule Demmissie, President of Ally Invest, and thank you for joining me today in a conversation with two amazing financial advisors, Anna Conte, who runs Dare to Dream Financial Planning, and Dasarte Yarnway of Berknell Financial Group. Both Anna and Dasarte are leading the charge of really serving a wide swath of individuals with a myriad of different needs and experiences, but they also speak to the language of who those individuals are, which, as we know in our industry, has not been as expansive as it could be. So with that, I'm really excited to have you join us, Dasarte and Anna. How are you?
Thanks. I'm great. Thanks for having us.
Doing well. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Oh my gosh, we're so lucky to have you in this conversation. So one of the things I wanted to first make sure people understood is who you are. What is your practice, and who do you, if you have a segment and target segment that you listen to or serve, who they are, that would be helpful for us to understand.
Go ahead, Anna.
All right. So thanks so much for the kind introduction, Lule. I am Anna Conte. I am the CEO and founder of Dare to Dream Financial Planning. We really focus on 30, 40-something-year-old women of color, primarily business owners who are looking to build wealth and really achieve more financially than where they come from.
Fantastic. How about you, Dasarte?
Again, Dasarte Yarnway. I am the founder and managing director of Berknell Financial Group, a firm that I started 5 years ago. Berknell is a home for everybody that is trying to break generational curses and design their own wealth on their terms. Throughout my history, working on Wall Street, there was always a minimum, right? To say like you couldn't work at this bank unless you had $2 million in investable assets today. That cut out my mom. That cut out my aunties, that cut out my uncles, and a lot of the people that I grew up with, right? So with that being said, I started Berknell to serve those who were under served and overlooked. And that's what we do here. We've organized our firm to have two client groups. One is a private client group in which we do serve that high net worth demographic. But the group that I'm most excited about is the Wealth Bridge group, and saying, hey, you don't have to be a millionaire to work with us. We're going to invest in you, give you the tools that you need to, again, design your wealth. And we do that on a retainer basis. So I'm super excited about joining this panel with the great Anna and you, Lule, and I look forward to the conversation.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, both of you. Some exciting things you're doing. Let's start a little bit from the beginning. What is your perspective of what's driving the change in investor demographics? Like we know that there's a demographic shift happening, right? As you see it, both in the microcosm of your practice, as well as the broader communities that you interact with, how are you seeing that demographic shift influence financial services and financial advice, the way you give it?
I'll chime in there. I think, there are shifting demographic trends, as you mentioned, Lule. I think, from my target demographic, Black women are some of the highest educated and starting businesses at a disproportionate level compared to the general population. So I think that with renewed focus or increased focus on income and earning and building more financial stability comes seeking out financial advice. Excuse me. From my perspective too, I think that they also are recognizing that a lot of the advice or general recommendations that are out there might not necessarily apply to them. And so they're seeking out advice that's a lot more relatable too.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of still discovery that's happening among certain demographics, which has not been included. Understood. How about you, Dasarte? How has it influenced your own microcosm of your practice as well as your interaction with the community at large?
Yeah, I think we need to pay attention to what's happening in the world right now, right? So with that being said, unlike 1990 or in the 80s, what you're seeing now is the access to information, right? So anybody can Google how do I invest, right? Anybody can Google, what does the stock market mean? There's so much information out there for the millennial, for the boomer, right? To take control of their wealth. And I think that's something that no other generation has had before, right? So
Mhm.
we're seeing a lot of information being pumped into the atmosphere, and people are reaching out to grab it, right? And with that is going to propel actions for people trying to change their financial trajectory. So that's the first thing, just information is abundant right now. The
Mhm.
second thing I would say is access, right? Again, there were minimums at the bank that I worked at. There were minimums at the brokerage that I worked at. But now you have access that allows you to invest. You can go on a Robinhood. You can go on any app, right? You have Square that made Cash App that allows the unbanked to send money back and forth and buy Bitcoin, things of that nature, right? So not only do you have the information being pumped out, you have a way to now take the information that you've learned and put it into practice. So with that happening at a big scale, you see a lot more people coming to Anna, Dare to Dream Planning to get the help because now they're reading on ways that they can change their financial circumstance. And I think that's the same for my clients. I get a lot of questions all the time. What's going on in the market? How will the elections affect my portfolio? What's happening is because the information is there. And we as advisors have to separate the news from the noise that allows our clients to make the best decision for their goals.
Yeah. I think it's so fascinating. Like one of the reasons I'm here at Ally Invest is primarily for that reason, is because financial firms that are like digital like ours, they're starting to learn and really take advantage of what's happened with this reduction of barriers, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's content that helps people distill, as you said, the facts from confusion, or this minimums, right? Like we have a robo that's like less than $100, right? Like who would have thought when I first started out, and I'm not that old in our industry, minimums were like 3 million, 2 million, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who would have thought that this day would come, which is fantastic, both in terms of information, as you call it, as well as access. Now, let me shift a little bit. What's interesting is I thought the access and information revolution would really widen the tent. And the reality is, if we have to look at it, is that it's still engagement is not there yet, right? Especially among communities of color, where again, part of it is, you be what you don't see, right? But there hasn't been as much engagement, even though the access and the information has gone up. What in your practice has been the secret bullet that has activated your customers?
That's a great question.
Yeah, Dasarte, I was going to say, I want you to go first because you've been doing this for a while.
The secret bullet. So this is what I will say before I even touch the secret bullet. What's happening for communities of color is the feeling of uncomfort, right? I'm not comfortable putting my money into the market because I've never done this before.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of us haven't had these conversations at the dinner table. How do I know this is real? Is this a game? Am I gambling, right? You get some of these ideologies because nobody's taken the time to explain it to you. So in my practice, what I did from the onset of starting Berknell Financial Group was leading with education and saying, I'm going to create the mediums. For the person that likes to listen, there's a podcast. For the person that likes to read, there's a weekly blog and 3 books that you can subscribe to. For the person that likes to see, we have some videos on YouTube. But go ahead and educate yourself to be comfortable with this thing that's going to help in your multi-generational wealth creation. So for my clients and for the community that I serve, that's the first thing that I want to do. I want to teach you how to fish instead of giving you a fish, right? And I think that if more advisors lead with the educational piece, now we begin to take information and turn it into action, right?
Yeah.
And that's where we're at with our communities.
Yeah, good point. Anna, how about you? How have you translated this sort of access versus engagement paradigm?
Yeah, I think that, the first thing that came to mind when you asked that question too, is that, you and I, Lule, have had a conversation about the wealth gap, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that the investment knowledge is another form of the wealth gap, right? So, I didn't learn about investing growing up. I'm sure, that is very common circumstance, despite the fact that I was born and raised in the US. And so, there's that first piece of not being familiar. Like Dasarte said, I don't know if I'm throwing my money away. Am I being risky? Am I being too nonchalant with the money? I think also, frankly, when when you work so hard to amass some savings, it is very scary to potentially put that at risk. So I think that is also another barrier. But in terms of relating, I think for me personally, it's authenticity and relatability. So obviously I put out content, Instagram, blogs, and those kind of things as well, podcasts. But I think what has been the most impactful in terms of the response that I've gotten is when I am very forthcoming and honest about my personal journey with investing and personal finance and learning more. And that seems to resonate with people because they have this perception of us like we are up here and we have all of the knowledge and we've never made mistakes and we've never sold something when we shouldn't have. And I think that dispelling that kind of ideology and putting us on that pedestal really resonates with people.
Yeah, I think the myth is more dangerous than the reality, right?
Mhm.
That's very important. You know, one of the things we've also found is that we often say this, which is get started. So make the risk smaller and then get started. Because I think part of that demystification that you're talking about of breaking apart like the fear is like knowing with your own eyes and ears that it's not that scary. You know, whether it's like $50, $10, just do something, open an account and just get started, feel your way into it, right? I think part of it is sort of like, as you said, there wasn't the uncle, the aunt, the mother or father, or whatever the figure is, that influencing figure in one's life in our communities that has shown like, oh, this is how you do it. You know, the way that apprentices show the teachers show their apprentices how things are done, right? So just getting started small, I think, is another sort of really important mechanism to demystify that, to get rid of that fear. Okay, that was very interesting. So let's shift now to, I'm going to go a little deeper into the realities of the stats, right? So just starting off with one, which is, you know, we are often bombarded by the statistics about the gap between median household income or wealth gap between Black and brown folks and the broader population. And just to just ground our stats here, just take median household as an example, right? We can look at this at any other stat, but median household is a proxy of that. I think it's about 63,000 overall at the US versus for Blacks, it's 40, for Hispanics, it's 30, right? So a sizable gap. How do you, and I'm not reminding you of anything you don't hear in any other panel that you've ever been in or a situation that you've been in, but how do you, as individual advisors, turn these stats into motivation rather than sort of making you feel like this problem is never going to be solved? Let's start.
I was just going to say, I just participated in a conversation the other day about this. Somebody was talking about how like 1%, 400, they were talking about the potential tax reform and how $400,000 only represents like 1% of the US population in terms of earning. And it made me think that like a statistic is not a rule. And seeing, you know, you can't be what you don't see, as you mentioned, Lule. I think it's the kind of thing where if people are not, if we use statistics as a proxy for this is all that's possible for you, then I think the first thing is breaking that and really showing them that you can achieve more, you can have more, and leading by example and discussing what we've been able to achieve as a community is also really important to kind of break through that, because there are so many of us that are achieving well and are really hitting that next level.
Yeah, that's very interesting. How about you, Dasarte? How do you keep motivated rather than feeling like, ooh, this is a big mountain that can't move?
Yeah, I mean, I think that all mountains are movable. I think that we have the power to do that if we fix our mind in that direction first and foremost. But there's proof. There's people that have come before me that have made dramatic change in the industry and within the communities they serve. So I think that I'm called to be a part of that change, right? But I think the bigger thing is helping your clients understand that these mountains can be moved as well. So for me and our process at Berknell, we start with a very informal call, right? So we can understand what narratives are people telling themselves, right? Like, I want to understand what you've been telling yourself about money for the last 20, 30, 40 years. I think that's the starting point. So I may be able to believe it. I may be motivated to change it, but it's our responsibility as advisors to transfer that belief onto the clients that we serve through the processes that we've built into our firm. So to your question, I'm motivated because it's been done before. I'm motivated because people of color are talented, capable, intelligent, smart, fruitful, right? Now it's just transferring these beliefs onto them through our processes. So I think that, for Anna and her firm, for what I'm doing, and for the plethora of minority advisors out there, we're all trying to transfer this belief that we know to be true onto the communities that we serve.
Yeah. And, it's interesting how much of life is a mental game as much as it is anything else, right? And just to shift on that a little, just to give you a stat, the Federal Reserve does all of these studies that are really rich with insights on consumer behavior and other things and facts. And what is so interesting is that the typical Black family household headed by someone with an advanced degree still has less wealth than the white family household with a high school degree. I mean, let's sink in for a second, right? A Black family with an advanced degree still has a wealth gap versus a white household with a high school diploma. The power of statistics is that it even makes light dark, right? Like, how is that even possible?
Yeah.
So, and we know that, there are many explanations underneath it, but it's still, it just tells you how the feeling and the reality of some of these statistics in itself can play mental games on people in a way that keeps them sort of under indexing in these areas, right? And we know that investing and partaking in financial planning is a really important part of building generational wealth, starting with yourself for a lot of Black and brown folks. Tell me a little bit about how, even in your context, in your practice, you help your Black and brown investing clients or young clients overcome the nature of stats such that stories like that don't happen, what I just quoted you.
It's a lot that you said. I just wanted to touch on that idea of education. For so long, right? Our parents that have come from other countries, for a lot of the African Americans here, that was our only chance to make something of ourselves, was to say, go to school, get an education. Because with that, there's a linear progression to wealth, right? Wealth. There's a linear progression to a good job, a stable job with benefits, right? Things of that nature. So we've been conditioned to think that this higher education is our way out of whatever circumstance that we've been in. So I wanted to touch on that first. Secondly, is my way of talking to people or kind of motivating them against that stat, kind of unconsciously, because I'm not really thinking about the stat, but it's saying the new way to stability is actually creating your own thing. It's actually having equity in your knowledge. It's actually having equity in your business. It's having equity in the business that you work with, right? It's having and creating passive income streams, because no matter what, like they say, the Black man, the Black woman, the minority is always, we're seen as less than in the eyes of some of our corporate, our employers. So with that stat, what do? We have to create our own things. We have to have equity, right? And this is the shirt, pay me in equity. Like, we have to begin to do that. So my whole thing is, we're going to help you design your wealth on your terms, right? And by doing that, we want to make sure that financial independence is a reality. So everything that you were saying, that stuck out to me, because the game has changed, right? It's no longer go to school, get your education, because the stat says it, that you can do all of that and still get paid 50% less than somebody in the same role, right?
And it's not to say education is not essential, right? I think what you're saying is there's an and to this equation.
Exactly.
Missing out on that and. Anna, one of the things you and I talked about was how, the firsts typically have specific challenges that are different than somebody, even who doesn't inherit generational wealth, but is inheriting generational knowledge, as you call it, right? That investment knowledge. And the firsts have, even though they get like an advanced degree, they have to send money to relatives or support, like it's a different equation for them. Tell us a little bit about in this forum about, like, as you advise your customers who are the firsts, some of the tips of the trade that you share with them to fulfill what they consider to be their generational obligation as the first, but still stop the drainage of not being the only, right? Where we're starting to be built.
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think going back to what Dasarte was saying, I do really preach to my clients because they are in a younger demographic also that by building wealth for themselves, it gives them flexibility in terms of their own life choices, right? In terms of making decisions that are from a want and not from a necessity place. But then also it also allows them to be more generous with their family. So that really is the first step, right? And it's really the foundation for ensuring that they don't become a statistic, right? Um, I'd say also there are a few other things I think. Putting boundaries around it, and balancing that act. Once you've kind of have your foundation set for yourself personally, is really important. So whether that be, deciding certain causes that you want to support in terms of your family, if there are certain people that you want to support particularly, that's also very helpful. Or just having, let's say, a pot of money that you say, I am going to put aside a little bit every month, and that is for my family, and when it runs out, it runs out. But I'm making that commitment, I'm honoring that commitment, and then I'm also making sure that I'm making progress towards my goals for me and my nuclear family as well.
Yeah. Can I
Yeah,
chime in on that?
of course, of course.
I think that, Anna, I don't want to speak for you, but I think that we understand this tax, right? This familial
Oh
tax,
yes.
because our families have given so much to give us the
Mhm.
opportunities that we've had, right? And a
Yeah.
lot of first generation folks feel that way. Anna has a podcast talking about the realness of first generation folks, right? And we feel this way. And I think what she's alluding to here is financial planning. Like, because this is your reality, you have to double down that much further on having a plan, so you know that you're taking care of your own wealth creation, but you're also paying homage to the people that's come before you. That's a
Absolutely.
super big reality. So I really
Yes.
appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the reasons I call it the first rather than the first generation is because it's true of Black and Brown folks that live here too, that have been here
Hmm.
generations.
Hmm.
Because of the structural sort of impediments that exist, they end up being the first going to college in their community.
Hmm.
And so the first to graduate from high school. So I feel like it's such a common thread among broad-based Black and Brown communities here. So, what's interesting is I actually there's no such thing as having too many degrees or too many job titles for you not to adopt really good best practices. So we have this thing at Ally Bank called buckets. So the minute after I spoke to you, Anna, I literally established two buckets, one in my bank account and another in my investment bank, in my invest account, so that I'm not only putting savings in there for the drain of family, but also long-term capital that's growing, because I know that this ain't going to go away anytime soon, right?
Hmm.
That it's going to keep,
Yes.
but we want to create that balance of helping family, but not being the last one to be the first, if you will.
Yeah.
That makes me so happy.
Oh, of course. Yes. No, it was a very good help advice, and I think that's really valuable. So now let's shift to getting out of the macroeconomic trends or insights into the micro. I want to delve in a little bit into your practices. And one of the things we talked about earlier was how people need to see story, right? Story is one of the other tools that says, I too can do it. She looks like me, or he looks like me, and it's not impossible, right? How have you, tell me a little bit of story in your book of customers that has either just warmed your heart or actually sharpened your toolkit in terms of how you advise? I'll start with you, Sarte.
I have a lot of stories. I think the first thing I have to say about that is, like, advisors have to be process driven, because that is helpful for the clients. It's like a mind hack for them, or framework for them to think about their own financial plan. So for us, um, I'll tell you a simple thing. Like, people come to us with a lot of pieces moving at one time, right?
Mm.
So our framework, our financial planning process, is the right planning process. So that's retirement, investments, insurance, taxes, and estate planning, right? Now I feel like more of my clients are talking to me about this right planning process. Like, hey, I really want to focus on the I because I want to buy a house, or my tax situation is changing. Can you help me with the T, right? So I think the success is, for all of my clients, is really that shift in mindset to begin to look at money as something that they can control versus having money control them. So that's just the biggest takeaway from my book of business. What do you think, Anna?
Yeah, I think that is very impactful. And I love when clients come to me with that kind of information, like, what do you think about this? And it just makes me happy. Like
Well, you just
things we've
had one
talked
right
about in the
now, right?
past. Yeah, exactly. It just makes me so happy. But I would say one of the most I recently had a client who is like similar first that you mentioned, and she has a W-2 job, and her and her husband both have parents that they anticipate having to support in the future. And she also has a business on the side. And despite the fact that she's working so hard and doing so much, it was just so inspiring to me once we had those initial planning conversations, how she felt just a level of confidence that I didn't see her walk in with when we first started working. And that made me so happy because I know that that has knock-on effects for her immediate family. So she feels more confident helping her parents, helping her in-laws, helping her siblings, like with financial support, but then also knowing that she can still achieve what she wants to in terms of her own personal life and her own business goals. You know, she has a goal to have her business replace her W-2 job income, and then she wants to leave and do her own thing and really build her own shop. And just running the numbers and showing her that she can do that within a reasonable time horizon, not like it's this pie in the sky dream, was very and seeing that shift within her was very just give me all the warm fuzzies.
That's
There you
awesome.
go. One thing that I think that I was thinking about it as you were talking, right? Like you help people realize the best of themselves from a financial perspective, right? And one of the things that I was most proud of last year was that 15 of our young clients bought houses last year. Wow. 8 of them were people of color. And when we talk about wealth, like, you know what I mean? A home is one of the things that is like going to be your biggest purchase throughout the course of your life. So shifting the statistic, if you will, and saying like, you can be a homeowner, right?
Yeah.
Like you can own something, you can own an asset or something that I was proud of thinking about a story, but didn't want to interrupt. Go ahead.
I mean, I think that's awesome. I mean, this, one of the things that I love to talk about financial advisors is like the underappreciation in our society of like how advisors can unlock dreams, right? Right. Advisors can unlock dreams. And so I think that this is just a good conversation from that perspective as well. Tell me a little bit about techniques that are tried and truths in our industry, but don't necessarily work with certain demographics that you have. Like, I'll give you an example. I'm a huge fan of FIRE, right? I think that, financial independence, retire early, and some of the techniques that it employs about sort of shrinking your footprint of cost so that really you can either retire early or have financial independence early, right? That's one example. But I can see some flaws for FIRE, for instance, in my world, a lot of years, I still had to support family, right? So at the end, extended family, I don't mean just immediate. So it wasn't as simple as shrink my footprint, right? And so, although I still am a huge fan and I use so much of it in my world, what has been techniques that are traditionally utilized in our industry that you have found you had to tweak and adjust for the kind of demographics you're serving? Did I throw you for a loop?
A little bit. There are a few. I was trying to choose. From my perspective, I think one of them is around investing, right? I think that our industry makes investing very complicated, and the cynic in me feels like it's intentional, so that people will hire some financial advisors and they are the only ones that have that knowledge, right? But I also think that has the fact that they make that very complex, and there are all of these conversations about really buying low and utilizing options, or there are just all of these very complex things that I think are completely valid. But when you're talking to a novice investor, the reality is that freaks them out. I think it scares them. So as you mentioned earlier, starting small, I think starting small and simple is really the key to getting people in the seat and staying in the seat when it comes to their investing journey, because otherwise it leads to adverse investor behavior. And all of us know that is really the determinant of investment success, right?
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Dasarte?
Um, it's a lot, like Anna said. I think that the ideology of paying yourself first is like a singular focus in our industry, like meaning save or invest, really, like invest your money. And when I think about demographics that I come from, sometimes this means pay down your debt. You know what I mean? Take
Yeah.
back that, right? So I think that broadening the definition of pay yourself first is important. And I don't think that we take enough time to dive into what that means and unpack that, especially for our community, right? Because you'll have people that come in, maybe they have a large lump sum of debt, but they're like, I want to buy a Tesla. I'm
Yeah.
like, the biggest return you can get right now is probably paying off your debt,
Yeah.
right? So just diving in on what some of this means. And that takes me back to my earlier point about education, right? It's
Yeah.
our duty, it's our charge, it's our responsibility to educate folks so that they're making the best decisions for themselves.
Yeah, I love that. Pay yourself first, widen that definition. I definitely like that. Last question I have for you, and then we'll sort of wrap it up, which is, in most things in life, habits are really important, right? Habits can either drive you to automatically do good things for yourself or drive you to automatically do bad things for yourself, but they can be really powerful things. Habits can. How do you employ either just behavioral psychology habits to create these trajectory changes, repeat changes in your customers' financial lives? And I'll start with you this time.
Okay, sure. So this is actually something that I work on a lot, and I find it to be really impactful because the way you've been thinking about money really impacts the way you behave with money. And so unpacking that and really understanding, and not to be like all, airy fairy, but really unpacking how you think about money, what some of your most memorable money memories are, and understanding how that ties to behaviors you have today is very important. And so once you figure out like, okay, I've been doing this behavior that I think is not really serving me well because of this, then you can create systems around that, right? So if you are, for example, I just talked to somebody recently and she said, she has a tendency to overspend on her kids. And so if she has $1 in her bank account, she is putting it for her kids in some way, shape, or form, which, is great. It means she's a great mom. But at the end of the day, it also might have an adverse effect in terms of her ability to save and invest for her future. So what we talked about is creating a separate account, right? That bucket system that we talked about earlier, where she can transfer the amount of money that she wants to spend and have some limits on that. And that way she can, save and invest freely, and she has a plan for the rest of her money. But it really is something that I think is like the software in our brains, and it's running our brains, it's running our life, it's running our financial life as well, if we're not careful.
Absolutely. How about you, Dasarte? How do you employ habit as for good, if you will, in financial planning?
It's a great question. Personal story here. I just got a therapist like in July because I feel like you got to work out your body, work out your mind. So it's really like a preventative or maintenance exercise for me, right? So in going through unpacking things, I'll journal every day. I'll go work out. I have my routine, right? In the beginning, very hard for me to do. It's like, man, I don't want to do this. I'm so busy. I have other things to do. But I think that with humans, it's a game of momentum, right? Once you get the ball rolling, right, you're able to continue the exercise and it becomes easier. So for my clients, I tell them all the time, we just have to change your behaviors. We have to build momentum in you. So I tell them to think about, saving or investing or paying down debt in a way that builds momentum. Let's shoot for a few small wins and then we'll get to the big win. And then we'll watch, rinse, repeat. In practice, that looks like investing a small amount into your Roth IRA per month, right? And then we'll get to that goal. Hey, I have $5,000 in my Roth, or I have $1,000 in my Roth now. You know what I mean? So we're just going to build the momentum, right, with the behavior, with little small actions before we get to that big win. So I always tell them the 1-2 punch is a small win, big win, right? Small win, big win. And we continue to do that. It's about building that momentum, building that confidence to know that you can, right? And I think that's how you change behavior over time.
Thank you. Thank you so much to both of you. Look out, world. There are a lot of Annas and Dasartes coming around, and they are bringing a really important voice to our investing and saving world and beyond that. It was such a pleasure to speak to both of you. Thank you so much for opening up both your best practices, but also just your own personal stories to show how it looks like when you start including more people in financial services. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.